Well, hello and welcome to another episode of The Way I See It. I gotten to where I'm so busy I only do these like once a month now. I used to do them like twice a week. And now even looking back to a year ago when I could do them twice a week, I'm like, how did I do that? I don't know.
COVID?
Maybe, I guess. But even when Lydia came home and was homeschooling starting in March, and I was still finding some way to do, maybe not. Maybe that's when I started tapering off. But at any rate, it must have been COVID. And I had all my kids in public school at one point. So I was here alone a lot. And I'm not anymore. So everybody knows Christin if they have seen past videos of mine. And she's not Christin Curtis anymore as she was when I first had you on the Christin Curtis interview. So since the last time you were on my show, you're now Christin Jacobs.
It's true. 3 months in, and he's a great man, so I'm excited.
It'll wear off. No, I'm just teasing. Yeah, hopefully it'll never wear off. I mean, they always say the honeymoon phase wears off, but I don't know. It depends on the personalities of the people. I remember a couple of years into our marriage, and people were like, people would say, "Oh, you just wait."
Oh my gosh, it's literally like the most annoying thing, if I want to be honest. Like, that's a different episode entirely of just people's encouragement and well wishes.
It just depends on if you're the kind of people who make mountains out of molehills or molehills out of mountains. And if you're the kind of people that are okay with like letting little things be little things and, forgiving quickly and not taking offense, it's it never gets really bad or whatever. I mean, you'll go through things that you might say be like, this is a really bad time, but it's not like the whole marriage is going to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. So anyway, I had her on. I'm having her on to discuss a subject that no one previously saw except for Christin and a couple of other people.
It's me.
I did a YouTube video and I wasn't satisfied with the final product. So I wanted to talk about this with the dog.
No, she just wanted to find me, but we still are going to talk Gracie.
I wanted to talk about this with Christin, and because it was a subject that I felt like just needed two voices and two perspectives and two different tones maybe to approach it. So I guess it's a defense of Western culture, and I'll go ahead and tell everybody right up front that the goal here is to show that Western culture is not whiteness. So in defense of Western culture is not a defense of whiteness, because calling Western civilization whiteness is in and of itself a misnomer, I think. So kind of the premise here is that when black people or any other race but white people get up, they come up in these school board meetings and there's videos, and I'll put up some graphics like I did in my other video that no one ever saw. that people are upset and they're coming out and they're upset against like critical race theory or any of those critical theory positions, and they'll say, no one can tell my child that they can't achieve everything, and all the white people are in the back clapping. We're like, yeah, see, this person sees it the way we do. And then someone on the left who is of that, just that social justice-y, woke, they'll say, oh, you poor black person or Latino or Latinx or whatever person of color, you just don't realize you have internalized racism. Your mind has been colonized by whiteness, and that's why you think your idea of success is just skewed. You've just bowed to the hegemony. How do you say that word?
Girl, your guess is a lot better than mine.
Hegemony is how you spell it. But you don't realize it, that your mind is just colored white. And so, but what they're saying when they say white or whiteness is they're talking about this Western culture that is U.S. society. So, anyway, what do you think about all that, just off the top of your head?
I have two different thoughts. I think one is a Christian, and then one is just someone who is more conservative and a person of color or black. I'm actually biracial.
Yeah.
So, and I don't choose sides. I'm literally both of them. So
Yeah.
that also has its own, we've already talked about that. That has its own mark on my head because I don't identify. It's weird. It's weird.
You've internalized that racism,
So
Christin.
weird.
You've internalized that racism.
Oh my gosh. So as a person of color, to hear these things, my family is conservative, and I'm talking about my dad's side, my Black side, if you want to, is conservative. Him and his dad, that side at least, but they were also very big on like education, and the person who was the best fit for the job would get these things, and they never spoke on that they didn't get an opportunity because of the, like, my dad will say this to this day. He will say, the person who is best equipped for the job is going to get the job. Like, there's nothing else in his brain that's going to skew that is what is keeping him down. Like, what's keeping him down is the man, you know? And so, like, I grew up with that strong resilience of going, like, I will work hard. I have a hard work ethic. If I have high character and a hard work ethic, like, that will take me places that if I did not have those things, it wouldn't take me. So I know that that's not everybody's growing up, everybody's background. I know that there are people who are in a different household where they were told exactly opposite, that just because they are someone that looks like me, that they will automatically be denied those certain things because of that. We have different backgrounds, and I acknowledge both of them. What you are heavily influenced by the people who speak into you. With that being said, I reject critical race theory as a whole for many reasons, which kind of more bleeds into Christianity, of just saying just because someone is born white, that they innately, I mean, at its very end, if you go to like its very core, like that they have to pay for the sins of people that they never harmed. Like, I have to go, half of me, let's make it a little funny satire, half of me has to pay the other half of me for something that neither one of them, they didn't know each other at the time. Neither one of them knew each other, but because something happened, like, I have to, one, go back and pay, but two, there's no like holding someone accountable just for them and their behavior. It's holding someone accountable based on other people's, it's not even behavior at that point because they didn't do anything. So it's literally like you're holding someone accountable, not even for morals. No morality is in this. It's just a reckless, like, what's the word? Reparations. Like, yeah. I mean, it's just endless. There's no grace. There's no, there's nothing in the Christian faith. So I'm talking specifically Christians right now. There's nothing in there that I would be very hard pressed to see how you could come across this from a Christian perspective and say, this is in line with the gospel. It's not in line with the gospel at all. You can't go in line with it for the reasons of, one, I'm not accountable. I didn't do anything, but now I have to pay for something that someone else did. Two, just because the Lord made me a different color, which in and of itself is racism. If you want to take that there, it's just the reverse of it, is saying, like, because you are this way, you owe us, or you are this way, or you're conditioned to be this way. It's like you are now assigning, which is a fallacy. Anybody pick up on that? We're assigning everything to attribute all blame or anything that I really want to lump into this bucket to you as a people group as a whole. So no more are these people individuals, which everybody on the left would like individual rights, individual things. No more are white people individuals. They are white people, blanket, white people, big W. And I'm just like, the irony logically of going, this is supposed to help racism by creating a whole new other racism and then pinning that blame on them and then teaching other people to think that way. Oh, if you don't think that way, you'll be punished or you're wrong. Like, involves, one, no critical thinking at all. You're not allowing other people to think critically about things. You're taking away certain rights to force people to believe this narrative. That if I was to do that on a conservative side, saying you have to believe that this is true, they would lose their mind. People would lose their mind because they're like, I have a right to think the way that I want to. I have a right to teach these things. People, you know, free speech, all these other things. It's like, yeah, well, you just took that away with a whole entire theory because of, that's my first thing. That's just my overall, like my rejection of critical race theory. And then we can get into other things.
Well, and I want to point out, because you said it doesn't allow for critical thinking, but it has the word critical in it, but the word critical in critical theories, like there's various kinds, and we've kind of used critical race theory has become the catch-all for all of this stuff here in America. But that kind of critical is not the same kind of critical thinking. Critical thinking has to do with thinking and really thinking through the pieces of something and what holds up and what doesn't hold up, whereas critical theories basically look at dismantling and building something new. That's kind of what they always seek to do. They always seek to find the faults and change things.
Yes.
Whether or not there's, you know, rather than critically thinking, which is just stand back and kind of look at it and figure out
if something needs to be
changed, you know, or maybe just a little bit needs to be changed.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that's where a lot of us, we get on two different wavelengths when we're talking, because we'll think, you'll have a lot of Christian pastors that have kind of tried to be nice about this. Have you read Fault Lines?
By Bodhi?
Yeah.
No, I haven't read it yet. My husband is reading it, and he's like, I love this book so much.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm toward the tail end. But he says the 11th commandment is thou shalt be nice, and we don't believe the other 10. I'm like, that is true. So basically, a lot of pastors or churches, they believe that commandment, right? Thou shalt be nice. And they want to be empathetic with folks, you know, who are having these narratives of suffering and oppression, and, you know, they'll quote the verses about how Jesus came to, you know, break the bonds of the captives, and, you know, that kind of stuff. But they don't realize that they're aligning themselves with someone who, to the Christian, it may be like, yeah, we got these problems in the system and we need to fix these problems. But to the leftist, to the secular leftist, the problem is not that there's problems in the system. It's that the system is the problem. Yes. The system itself is the issue. So, I kind of want to just go back, way back in history. And I know you said before I started recording, oh, you might have to take the lead on this, but I'm hoping you can, like, at least give some color commentary here.
I will give color commentary.
So, and that was not a race joke, just because someone's going to pick up on that.
Oh my gosh.
That was a sports joke. In the sports, you have the person who's calling the plays, and the other person is the color commentary. They're just giving little tidbits of, you know, interesting tidbits to go along with what's being talked about in the game. If you go back 2,000 years, and between 1,000 and 2,000 years, and you look at cultures around the world, whether their skin was white or black or anywhere in between, first of all, they had one thing in common. They're all enslaving each other. They're enslaving people who look like them, and they're enslaving people who don't look like them.
Yes, that is a huge part. Slavery has been a huge part of human history since the beginning, like a huge part of, and it's a nasty part. Like, so the very fact, and I will say this right now as a disclaimer, who's ever watching that's like on the left, it is a good and right thing and a just thing to condemn slavery. So let's just go there. So, but this,
we're not trying to make an excuse and play like, slavery's okay because we've always been doing it. No.
This is just to give full context that slavery exists in any culture. And I would highly encourage people to go look at, sadly, other cultures that have done this in the past. So I'll let you continue.
Yeah. And I'll throw up a graphic like to shows the transatlantic slave trade from, I think it was like 1500 to the late 1800s, whenever kind of the slave trade ended. Although there's still slavery in the world today. You had slavery, at least the transatlantic African slave trade specifically. African tribes were already enslaving each other, and then when they realized they could make more money for it, they were taking their slaves to the coast, You know, it's not like the white people were landing and infiltrating Central Africa to go catch slaves. They were buying them there at the coast from other black people. And it shows, anyway, this graphic shows them going, most of them went to South America. Some of them went out of North Africa into the Middle East, right? And then there's also been, historically, there's been white people who were enslaved by Muslims or you know, people kind of in that Eastern culture where you get a lot of different shades of skin intermixing. Yeah. And then, like, there's the story of when Christopher Columbus first landed, the natives that came to greet him were at first excited because they were being enslaved by other brutal native cultures there in the Caribbean or the wherever they were. Have you, what is it? Apocalypto, the movie Apocalypto. They're like in like modern day Mexico or something. This is how bad I am at history. Wherever Columbus landed, they were wanting him to help them rescue them from the other people who were enslaving them, right? Like, and Columbus didn't land with the goal of enslaving people. It's just been done around the world, and people just did it, and some people just mastered it and did it a lot on a much bigger scale. Mm-hmm. But that's just kind of a side note. But looking back in history, that's one commonality that all humans have had. That's not a white thing. That's just a human thing, slavery. Another thing I noticed is, for example, like the living situations. I was amazed to think, you know, back in like whenever it was that Rome was expanding so quickly in the first couple of hundred years after the birth of Christ, or maybe even before the birth of Christ, but when they landed like on the shores of modern day England, you know, those people were acting and behaving and dressing in similar ways to, say, Native Americans or Africans or East Asians. I mean, wearing animal skin clothing and carrying spears or bows and arrows. And you know, the Mongols in the 11 and 1200s, they were riding on horseback, shooting bows and arrows, living in these housing dwellings that looked very similar to what Native Americans a world away were living in. So to me, it's just amazing if you look at actual history and not rewritten history, how similar people of all skin types have been in like their worship of many, their worship of many gods, the way they dressed, the way they lived, the way they
hunted. Technologies that they had at the time, like just there's not very new things until you get to different classes. Let's just say until you get to different classes, you basically live off of what you can make. So it makes sense that they would look similar.
Yeah. So for some reason, which you and I know some history, but we aren't historians, so no. I know we're not going to be able to get into all of the year-by-year details of this. But for some reason, coming out of the Mediterranean region, you have Judaism, you have this Greco-Roman, the Greeks and the Romans developed a culture that has changed the world. I mean, it is...
literally has changed. I'm so excited about this. They have literally changed the world.
Yeah. So you can look at those people historically, and I don't know 2,000 years ago what color their skin was. You know, this is Western civilization, and they did something by connecting people across thousands of miles to the east. Well, I'll do it this way since I'm mirror imaging. To the east, going all the way, you know, across the Middle Eastern desert, to the west, going all the way to Spain and modern-day England. So they created this culture where these ideas were shared, commerce was, you know, there was travel all across that world. And because of that, here we are today.
Really, it's like, but when you think of like major cities, like what happens, like why are cities so important to the development of civilizations? That's where commerce happens, which is where ideas are exchanged, which is where cultures are interbred and where they start to to transfer. They go from here, they go to there. When there's not a central hub where people go, cultures stay the same pretty much over time until there's something that connects them. That's why, intercoastals are so big, things change on them. That's why colonization, which I know we're going to get to, happens, is just because like you now have a place, and we'll just use Rome and we're going to stay there. We're not going to go quite yet until to this area of like where these, even biblically, where these ideas like Hellenism, like how these things have infiltrated in the church and how these things have infiltrated all over Europe to where they are. And it has more to do with the transfer of ideas and values and beliefs than it does with skin color or what that does. Like in a city, you could have a lot of people that look the same, or you could have a lot of people that don't look the same. Like I lived near Clarkston. And at the time, in a certain square radius, you have over 99 countries represented inside of that area. And so you're just kind of like, it might be 90. I think it's 90. And that's the case. Like if you take a snapshot of like, what does Clarkston look like? It's probably like Corinthians or something. Do you know what I'm saying? It's something like, people are divided by their race. No, people are divided by their culture. Really, that's ultimately a bunch of different cultures living in the same place, or a culture like.
And in a snapshot like that, or in Corinth, back in Bible times, you see two things. You see that it is important to do business with each other and exchange ideas and to have a common language or whatever. But you also see that it's important for everybody to bring their own individual culture to the table, to be proud of things about the way they dress or their language or their food or their music or whatever.
Yeah.
Like there is no culture that is universally good, and there's no culture that's universally bad. But where I'm going with this is that Western culture is universally better than every other culture if it's done right, if it is done with that kind of that multicultural drive to learn more, to teach us what you know, and we'll teach you what we know, and let's learn from each other. For some reason now suddenly that's bad, and the idea of multiculturalism now is not just let's learn from each other. It's, well, what makes you so sure that you're right? You're not right. These other ways of knowing they're right for some reason. And it's kind of like you've taken multiculturalism and driven it off a cliff or something here.
So I like what you had to say about people saying, well, your understanding of this is wrong. This is actually what's right based on your culture. Kind of like, in order to say something like that, you have to be able to raise yourself outside of the view of culture, like take a 30,000 foot view. Like, you can see my hand up here. Like, let's just come over here. Here's culture. At that point, you have to now, like you said, evaluate every single other culture in light of this culture. And I'm not talking about culture as in like the Black culture. I'm not talking about subcultures inside of a culture. I'm talking about major cultures that you would associate. So cultures have to do with shared beliefs, shared values, government. So if we want to divide them, we're not going to divide and saying like the Black culture or this culture, because that is a subculture inside of what we're doing. You don't have Black culture in Africa in the same sense that we do in America. So when you're talking about culture, like you need to raise above, and because what you're doing is you're just comparing American culture. So let's just go there. It's not whiteness. It is American culture as we know it today, because the rest of the world ain't operating like this. Like they have their own cultures. They have their own civil wars in their cultures. They're not concerned. They're not talking about your whiteness or your Blackness in Brazil. They may be talking about other aspects of their own, like
might have to do with your accent, or
it may have to do with your accent. It may have to do with your skin color too. Maybe you're a different color of me or someone else, but it doesn't have to do with Black or white culture. So that should give us some indication that this is not a universal thing. This is another way, not the way to view the world, but it is another way to view American culture in 2021. Like, you cannot just go, this is white culture universally, because what are you talking about? You're not talking about universal white culture. you're not, you can't be talking about that because other places have white people, like South Africa. So white culture in South Africa are white Brazilians. Are you talking about them? Like, it doesn't, you have to be able to go, oh, or
well, that's the problem on the left. They think they're talking about them because they think that all the white people from all the different places in the world are secretly trying to maintain power.
It's just not the case. And I mean, I know that's very trite, and I know that I'm not a doctor. I don't have my master's, you know, but it's just like, if you think about it logically, like throughout, okay, we don't work backwards in history and go like, based on where I am, I'm going to judge past ones. You go forward from history. So like, we should really be taking our cues from backhand. Like, what were they thinking back then? What did they think? What did they go off of? And then move forward going, was this a mindset that they had? Because if that was a mindset that they had in the past, that actually may be a valid argument to say, like, in the past, you saw many cultures, not just one, that suffered with this idea of whiteness versus blackness in multiple cultures, multiple major cultures moving forward. Then you can be like, oh, we'll see, in the past it's always been just black and white, when really, no, we're not looking at our culture and then judging everything else behind. We're looking back here, and back here it had more to do with, like, you were divided on religion a lot of times, you were divided on caste system a lot of times, you were divided on socioeconomical, like, and you were, like we said, divided on race. So that was a thing, but it's race within, even like within China.
It's ethnicity more than.
Yes, it's ethnicity. So it's like, it's just funny because it's like, there are no, like, what do we just segregate at that point all Asians because they don't have black people there? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it just can get to a weird place if you try to read history backwards instead of going backwards and going like, how are we moving, you know?
Well, I think to someone on the left, I'm just going to kind of play the devil's advocate. They're going to look at like Asia and they're going to be like, but they've been oppressed too, because when someone like England, you know, had the British Empire all over the world and they went over there, like, basically they believe that anytime white people have had any dealings with any other races, they've tried to screw them over in some way. And I would say, I don't know if that's not true. I mean, it may be true, but I would say everybody has tried to screw everybody over in some way. Maybe white people just were better at screwing people over. I don't know. There's some merit there, but it doesn't negate the problem of, as Christians, we believe, the problem of sin in every human heart. Whether someone, quote unquote, got away with it or not, in the case of, say, England expanding and going all over the place, or whoever, Marco Polo, he was from where? Italy, Spain, one of those places. Let me just, I don't want to hit on that too long because we'll just go down a whole other rabbit hole.
Yes, I was like, there could be multiple conversations about this.
but we're going to kind of go in that direction because we're going to talk about colonization. So, of course, that is like a big bad word, like you're colonized and you're a colonizer. I'm a colonizer. Stop being such a colonizer. And don't let your mind be colonized. What are the pluses and minuses of colonization? I mean, I don't know when the earliest colonization is. The earliest I know of is Rome. Or Greece. Did Greece do colonies? They were pretty small. They didn't really... I mean, Alexander the Great did conquer a bunch of places, but I don't know if he was trying to set up colonies in the way that Rome did. Whereas Rome did more of the, we're in charge up here, and as long as you're abiding by our rules, we're going to let you be in charge down here. Like, you can still handle your business, your local business. We're not going to get our fingers in all that. We're just going to take, the taxes off the top and just maintain power by having these colonies. And it's going to help you because you're going to do business with them through the avenue of Rome.
So pros and cons to that.
And then out of that, even colonization of the Americas. We can go colonization across thousands of years here.
Pros and cons. I think definitely with any type of like, let's go through history in general. Whenever a certain people took over another people, you have to look and see what those places did. So if you had a king come in, if we're going to talk like Babylonians, or we're going to talk about like ancient Persians, or we're talking about other people, I mean, they killed, they raped, they pillaged, all these big old words we don't use anymore.
And they were all brown skinned, and they did it to each other.
And yeah, okay, that's, I mean,
there was an ethnic difference, but it wasn't a racial difference.
No, there was an ethnic difference, and that should be noted. Most definitely, they were not white.
Yeah,
in its entirety. With that, when they came and took over, because that's been sadly the nature of humans, is they come, they take over places. That's what they do. The kingdoms, men crave power, right? So like men, it's just a thing. So kingdoms come, and the Lord also established governments. So we'll just go ahead and go there for that. But different kingdoms would get large enough, they would seek to rule over another, create wars. This is where we have different areas. Now, what did kingdoms do? What did other kingdoms do? Like, they destroyed, they took over, they sold their people into slavery. Like, these are the things that other kingdoms did, or other people in power, just to establish. They didn't, not everyone, maybe if you had a peaceful king, he may go, you know what, I like you guys, or you're not causing me too much trouble. Really, that's it. You're not causing me trouble. So you guys can stay in your homes. You just,
he told Nehemiah, you can go back and build that wall.
Yes, Nehemiah, you just go back. But like, he's still, what is he doing? Does he have his freedom? Is he like,
yeah,
I'm free? No, he's not free.
Like you got to come back after your job is done.
Yes, because I own you. Okay. Okay. So like, I mean, literally that's what we're talking about right now. So when I think about colonization and the difference, it's like, you could be educated. It just is a better, you could be educated. You could also learn from them, from someone who maybe is monetarily better off in a position than you are, who is smarter than you are. Yeah, the dog had to go inside. So you could get money, you could learn from them, you could adopt some of their culture and like start to infiltrate up their ranks or whatever. But guys, you're not going to ever be able to escape the reality that cultures take over other cultures in order for power. Like, you cannot escape that reality. So whether that is that it's through colonization, or it's through
slavery,
or people just interbreeding, like two tribes get together, they just become, but it's mixed up. So maybe that's more peaceful, maybe, but like, you're not going to be able to escape that aspect of history. So to say colonization is bad, it does have bad points, because taking over people does have bad points in any case, but also it has good things that I've benefited from. So I can't say that it's completely bad. I would much rather live with the type of government that I have at the moment than live under a dictatorship, than live underneath a like a warlord type thing, or just like different types of places or governments. I personally, out of all of the evils, out of all the things that have been touched by sin, touched by humans, by all the things that have been touched by mess, I would rather live where I am now, because I have the opportunity to be educated. The reason I'm talking to you right now is because I have rights. Mm-hmm. I have rights as a woman to be able to speak and think, and to go to school and learn, and to teach, and to hold a job, and to hold an office in government. Mm-hmm. That is huge. And other places can't say that because they haven't, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, there are pros and cons, and I don't want to diminish the cons of what has come as a result from that. I don't want to do that, because it's true. Yeah. It's true. It's just like, there's no utopia in this world. As Christians, we don't believe that there's a place without sin that's not been touched by sin, which means there's going to be death. There's going to be hurting of other individuals. And we honestly are just trying to make the most peaceful society we can until Jesus comes.
Yeah. Well, and kind of going back to you said a couple of things that kind of stuck out to me. When you were talking about how God establishes governments and kings, and in history, we have to go back and think about how were they thinking then, not how are we thinking now, and project that back then and say, how could they be like this? But there was something I was reading about, Jonathan Edwards, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the fact that he owned slaves, but he was this reformed preacher, and yada, yada, yada. And one of the things that says, like, he wasn't interested in like taking down systems per se, because in that day, people thought this is the way it is because God has established this the way it is. Like, he was actually very countercultural in that he allowed black people, whether free or slave, to have full church membership and come and take the Lord's Supper, which was like, what? You know, in those days, even though he didn't go on and speak out against slavery, and he owned slaves, and we believe he treated them okay, but the point is it was still wrong. But again, you have to go back and you have to think, but how did he see the world? Because he was a product of his time, and people then just assumed there are just these hierarchies. There's kings, there's peasants, there's free people, there's slave people. You know, treat your fellow man with dignity. And that's kind of it. Like, so it's like you have to go back into time and kind of see these people and see the world the way they saw it, to then, but then, like you say, colonization, let's say there's good and there's bad. The good is that it eventually worked itself through to us being a free country, and we had slaves, but then we stopped the slave trade, but we still had slavery. But then we had a civil war and we ended slavery. Then we had Jim Crow, but then we had civil rights. Like, we've had all these changes over time, and the reason we've been able to do that, I believe, is because of Western civilization, judeo-christian values. These values that were at the inception of the establishment of the United States in particular, allowed for these corrections to happen. It's another thing I always think about is, why were they colonizing? Like, for example, when Columbus was trying to find, he sailed, he didn't even know there was this whole 2 continents out there. He thought he was going to wind up in India and he was going to find this passage. And why was he trying to do that? It had to do with trade. It didn't have to do with, we want to go out and conquer people. We just want to go out and make slaves. Mainly, their main competition, Portugal, I guess, or who, if he was sailing for Spain, he might have been sailing for Spain. Their main competition was with each other, right? Like, they wanted to go explore to try to make their business better, to compete with each other. They weren't setting out to just go find people to conquer.
That's just a byproduct of what you're doing. Like, it's a bad byproduct, but it's a byproduct, like money, power.
I mean, I'm reading the history of the settlement of the Northwest Territory, which, before the Louisiana Purchase, the first Northwest Territory, which was like Ohio. And they're going out and they're just wanting to settle and just build houses. And they see the natives as, you know, odd. And they just want to kind of, most like people, like normal folks who just want to build houses and live their lives, don't really want to do anything good or bad. Like, they don't want to have interactions with them. They don't want to go out and murder and slaughter them. Now, you could pick apart every single time that the United States government had an interaction with the natives, or the natives, you know, scalped the frontier family living in their cabin. Who started? Whose fault was it? Like, eventually, I guess you could go all the way back to when white people landed on the shores and it was their fault. But seriously, in every single instance, it's like, well, sometimes it was the white people's fault that they just decided, we're just going to go out and say, you move or we're going to kill you. And sometimes it was the natives' fault because they were just seemingly unprovoked, just attacking these people because they didn't want them building a house where they were building a house. Again, it's a difference between looking at something broadly and saying, well, broadly, we shouldn't have taken their land. But then you could also say, but there was so much land and there were so few people and really there was room for us. Why couldn't they just let there be room? And why couldn't we have just all gotten along and made peace? Well, that's like saying, well, why can't humans just not be sinners? Like,
that's literally the conclusion you have to come to if you adopt that. You have to come to that. It's just another theory. It's just another way of thinking about the world. It's the way that they see it. It's a different way of thinking about the world, and it should be able to be criticized and pulled apart, just like any other way that I view a dictatorship or a tyranny. Like, I should be able to pull apart your critical race theory and be able to reject it because it's just another way of thinking about the world, and I reject it for the reasons that talked about, but it's just like critical race theory. Well, it demands perfection. It just demands perfection. And it's just like,
which you're never going to have, because even the proponents are slipping up themselves, and then they have to turn on each other.
but if that's the thing, is like the people who are genuinely like in favor of critical race theory, not, and are thinking through it, I would just like genuinely ask, like, at what point, like, is it, and not at what point isn't enough, but like really doing some introspection, like of looking at it fully, saying like, is this even possible? Does this stand? Or are there really like logical holes in my argument that don't stand up over time? And I'm not going to be one that hates or points a finger and goes, haha, I told you. That's literally not it at all. It's just like, to be able to have like it sucks to be able to sometimes be intellectually honest. It sucks because you see how bad we suck. We're just not good people. And so you have to grant, like, I mean, it kind of sucks to have to say, like, man, the Lord worked through slavery to bring about good, but isn't that what he said? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, It sucks to say those things, that Joseph was sold into slavery and yet he saved an entire nation. You know, like how the Lord works and uses wickedness. Not that he is a proponent, but wickedness is not too great for him to work inside of, you know? And so it's like, even in the midst of all of this happening, whether Jonathan Edwards or anyone else who held slaves at the time, you know, for those reasons of being like, this is just our crown of our culture that we're in, you know, maybe they'll be accountable for those things. But at the same time, like, I read back in the Bible where it says that these people were slaves too. Was it Philippians? Philippians was talking about Onesimus, or am I thinking of a different book?
Well, Philemon.
Yes, Onesimus, specifically a slave. And then
he also wrote about slaves and masters in like his book to the Ephesians. And
yes, so it's a real thing that I think the scriptures address head on in the culture, because it's just how it was, and it doesn't make it. But Paul did say, if you can get your freedom, then by all means, you know, get your freedom. If that's not an option, though, here are the things of how to live as a Christian. And I know that's not popular, but it's like, people who want to live honest Christian lives really have to wrestle with the things that scripture says, and like what scripture allows for, and like all these things. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not easy, but what's not easier is just rewriting history entirely to be something completely what it can't stand on, what it can't be, what it can't live
and to try to justify something you want to do now, because what you're going to end up doing is failing in whatever your endeavor is now, because humans,
a new culture, a new history, like this becomes a whole new thing that we read about in history books like 50 years from
now. How can you be guaranteed that history will treat you nicely if you're treating your history not nicely? So we put ourselves all in this. There's an original sin that all humanity shares, whereas in critical race theory, the original sin is whiteness, and only some people have it and other people don't. And the original sin is seeking power, and your salvation is in your oppression. But man, everybody's oppressed in some way, and everybody is oppressing in some way. Some people are just doing it at a much higher level on a whole bunch more people, but nobody is without sin in that respect.
No, and I think that that's why it's so important to stay focused on what scripture says. And I'm not saying that you should not be concerned about what's happening in your culture, because the Lord has used people inside of their own culture to affect their culture for their good. And then sometimes it didn't affect it. But I'm thinking about like Babylonians and Persians that I'm reading about in the Bible, or other things. Like, I don't know every single instance that they did something to somebody else, but we are like, in 100 years from now, if America is still here, like, are we going to be just a blip, just like the Persians? Or is anyone going to remember our name? Is anybody going to remember these things right now? Like, what is ultimately going to, I want people to fast forward, like even 500 years, what is going to really be that thing? It's not going to be critical race theory. That is the thing. It's just not going to be.
It takes up a whole chapter in the history, you know?
Yes, it's not going to, it just won't. It's not going to be it. And we talked a lot about it. So it's just a little bit hard. It's just a different gospel. So I'll just go ahead and say that from a strictly Christian. If you're a Christian, It's not the gospel. There's a different salvation. There's a different savior. There's a different sin, if you want to call it. There's no sin. There's no grace. There's no mercy offered. There's just, you're always at fault and you can't redeem. There's no redemption from it. So sorry, my half of me is condemned and the other half of me is trying to get free of being oppressed from that. And it's just, I think that the logic, if it tears down, if it breaks down for one person, which I'm not just one person, then it should be considered, like it has to be their idea has to be foolproof. Everyone should have to, and I know that's what the wokeness is. The wokeness is everybody waking up to this, but my experience is exactly opposite of what they're saying. So I have destroyed it a little bit by me just existing the way that I am right now. So it's just like, there are almost no words. When you were like, do you want to make this video? I was like, I'm so tired. I'm just so tired. I don't want to talk about
it. Well, I hope that we went in a direction that you had not really talked about much before. You know, because my goal, and I think we established it, I think we touched on everything, was just to show why I think Western civilization expanded the way it did, and did kind of, it didn't take over the world. I mean, right, there's the whole Middle East and Eastern cultures are still thriving, and we can still all do business with each other and learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, why did Western civilization grow and expand so much, but yet it wasn't, I wanted to kind of detach it from whiteness and show that it's not, the problem is not whiteness, and the problem, and the fact is that all of the things we need to change and improve upon can best be done, I think, through this lens of the judeo-christian Western civilization way of talking and discussing and government and doing business with each other, and that whole thing. I feel like I feel my feelings. Facts don't care about your feelings. I believe that's the best way forward is through those values, and that they aren't white values.
No, they're not white values. Those aren't. I exist from a person who probably looks like me or a little bit darker. I don't know.
Yeah, Adam and Eve, we're all there. We're all there together. Right. So I just want to say thank you so much to Christin for coming on and helping me flesh out this idea and talk about these ideas and kind of justify Western civilization and Western culture and talk about the pros and cons of all that. So thank you so much, Christin.
Thanks for having me again. It's always good to do this with you. And maybe sometime soon, once I get a little bit more under my belt of being married and like settled in a new state, we can do more of this.
Yes, we're talking. I'm in Georgia. She's in Florida. She was previously here in Georgia, but married life has carried her away. Y'all remember too, I'll go ahead and say the typical YouTube spiel. Go ahead and click like and subscribe. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to my channel. And thank y'all.